welcome to Chainmakers, where we sit down with the people building Web3, founders, product leads, and community builders shaping crypto from the inside out. I'm Brittany Laughlin, and today I'm joined by Yitong Zhang, co-founder of Agora, a governance-native platform helping communities coordinate better decisions transparently and on-chain. Yitong's been on both sides of the table, founder, product designer, and ecosystem thinker. So today we're exploring how we can reimagine community decision-making, why DAO tooling needs a redesign, and what comes next for crypto regulation. Welcome to Chainmakers.
Hey, it's good to be here. I'm so excited to chat.
Yeah, so I think where we have to start is your background and career, because you started at Coinbase and it's been quite a journey since then. So I want to kind of give the audience an overview of how you went from being design to co-founder of Agora.
Of course, happy to again get into it. I mean, you can see from my background even that the designer has not left me. Have all this stuff on my wall. I was on a drive to Yosemite in 2017. I remember distinctly. It was with my friend Ben and his friend Gabby, and both of them just French dudes, and we were just talking about like random things. They're kind of like not really in tech, kind of in tech. And then I was like, we were having like normal, reasonable conversations. And then every 5 minutes, I'd be like, but guys, have you thought about Ethereum? And they were like, no, stop. We're having a good time. What is this? And I was like, no, you don't understand. This thing is going up every 5 minutes. I can't believe it. You guys got to get on this. Anyways, that's kind of how I got into Ethereum. I bought a little bit of Ethereum on Coinbase. And I was like, whoa, this thing goes straight up to the moon, never down. What is even this sorcery? And so started reading into it. And this is in a time pre-ChatGPT. So like it took me a long time to get through the white paper, but I did. And it was kind of like a moment for me, right? Like I think I had read sort of like a lot of Bitcoin stuff. And like I thought it was cool. I'm not really a crypto anarchist. I wasn't like a big sound money guy. And I was like, this is cool, but like, it doesn't sing to me in the way that Ethereum does. And I was like, oh, okay. This is sort of just like a totally fundamental reimagining of economics, capitalism, sort of like a bunch of different things. It's a reimagining of the way the software like works and the way that we work together. And I was so excited. I came back from Yosemite and I was like, all right, it's time to build. I got to do something, and started working on a sort of price tracker for CryptoKitties. And this is when CryptoKitties was like the only thing on Ethereum driving the price up. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to make a coin market cap for CryptoKitties. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be great for all 25 people who are really excited about this. And then I was halfway through it. Again, pre-ChatGPT, so building real slow. And the price crashed. And then like nothing was happening. There was like, and I had the moment, I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. But like, really, it's just coins. There's nothing really to build in 2017. So in 2018, I took a job at Coinbase. This was sort of back then when people used Facebook. I was in this like designers who like crypto Facebook. There was like 7 people in that group. And the group was made by
these very niche communities.
This is fun, right? This is sort of like Connie, who like had just joined Coinbase to lead design there. I was like, hey, I'm going to just try to build a little community of crypto designers. And she was like, oh, wait, there's 7 people. That's it. And she was like, hey, you seem like you like this stuff. Do you want to just like come here and help us out on contract? I was like, sure, yeah. Like I was working at this like design agency, and I was like, why not? I'll come. And then first week, they were like, hey, like we have this app called Toshi. And Toshi is sort of like a WeChat like product. And it's like WeChat, but on crypto. And I was like, oh, okay, weird. Like I was using MetaMask. And they're like, yeah, this WeChat for crypto thing isn't really working. So we're going to just cut out all the chat app. We're going to cut out all the like weird things. It's just going to be a wallet now. So can you help us redesign Toshi from a WeChat clone into just like a normal wallet? I was like, sure, why not? It's not too hard. Spend a week working on this with their team. And then Friday rolls around and in comes Brian Armstrong. And I was like, oh shit, well, okay. Like this is like a, like pretty intense, fast moving culture. And then in tow comes Fred Wilson. And I was like, oh, okay, very interesting. And so like, they were like, hey, I heard that you were like redesigning Toshi. I'm really excited about this. Can I take a look? And so we do like a 15-minute presentation to Brian and Fred. And they were like, looks great, ship it. And so next week they started working on it. And that was the end of, like Toshi. And I was like, oh my God, this place is amazing. They just like ship stuff. The executive team is so decisive. They were like incredibly fast moving. I love this. I'm going to work here. And of course, it was never the same. And then that shipping speed kept going slower and slower and slower. And if you open the Toshi app today, which has been rebranded Coinbase Wallet, it's kind of back to being WeChat. So
maybe that's
full circle. Right? And it's like maybe it was just too early, right? Maybe now 7 years later we are ready for WeChat again. Anyway, so that's kind of how I got into crypto. And then in 2022, this was it really sort of like I had this moment where I was like, oh my god, I think the moment I've been waiting for is here. There's DeFi, there's DAOs, there's NFTs, there's apps again. I'm gonna leave and build my app. Finally, this is time. And so that's kind of when I started Agora with my friends Charlie and Ken.
I do want to talk about Agora. So for the folks who don't know, maybe you could give a quick intro of what it does and then talk about, sort of why that was the area of focus that you decided to develop in. Obviously, you had all this experience at Coinbase bringing into it.
Yeah. So Agora is very simply a governance platform, and our mission is to help people start on-chain organizations that are better than their off-chain counterpart. We're far from it, of course, both us as a product, but also us as a space. But that's sort of the mission and vision. And so, practically speaking, what that means is that we build token voting software for protocols because that's sort of where governance is today. We help folks like Optimism, Uniswap, ENS, Scroll, and many others run their communities, figure out access control, sort of like instantiate rules on who is allowed to do what under what conditions. But the long-term thing, everybody's read Vitalik's sort of article on like how he hates token voting. It's true, token voting is not great. And so like what really long-term what we're trying to do is sort of like move into what we think of as access management, controls, and sort of all the normal software that you would have in like a normal company, like, like Carta, but just simply their on-chain version that is programmable, like instantaneous, 24/7, and just strictly better in all sense. We're sort of not a DeFi thing where we're trying to sort of like create crazy yields. For us, success is sort of like just having workflows that are just a lot better than normal companies because we're built on the blockchain.
And I think what I love about Agora is that it does give organizations and DAOs and foundations the ability to do it on chain, because still a lot of this stuff happens in the Web 2 way, and it doesn't necessarily always fit sort of access controls there, or there just aren't as many controls that exist, which also is a failure. But I'm curious, how have you seen the use of your product change over time? Because obviously, as the DAO environment changes, as regulation changes, it impacts what you guys are doing and offering. So what's your current view on where the space is, and how is it going to change over even this next year with some of these regulatory changes?
Yeah, this is a topic near and dear to my heart. I think for a very long time, it felt like that the primary stakeholder for whom we were designing governance was Gary Gensler. And it was sort of this weird thing where Gary Gensler wouldn't tell you what he wanted out of governance, but everybody would be trying to guess based on the enforcement actions they see out of the SEC what sufficiently decentralized governance meant, which was really this like backwards exercise of like, okay, we're not designing for the token holders nor for the projects. We're designing for an SEC that won't tell us what they actually want. So it became this sort of really strange, almost like divination exercise, right? Where it's like a lot of there were these like law firms and like a very, very sophisticated people who like had all these legal theory and strategy around what the SEC wanted, and we were all at the end of the day doing our best at sort of like divination. And so I think this we were stuck for probably 3-4 years in this very clunky sort of like hardcore decentralized governance framework that really didn't really work for anybody who was in the system, but like was only designed to work, but also not really for the SEC. And so I think in 2015, a couple of things happened. One is that obviously we've had a change in administration, and that's not been all good. It's been sort of like a mixed bag. We've had a little bit of president like kind of committing crime on chain. It's not really crime, but it's like sussy. It's like crime adjacent. But at the same time, we're also seeing a lot of really good efforts around clearer regulation. So we're seeing significant progress on the market structures bill. We're seeing significant progress on stablecoin bill. And all of these things are sort of like in progress. And simultaneously, we're seeing sort of a little bit of a reprieve in enforcement. And so I feel like what really we're in right now is sort of this interregnum between the previous regime and the next regime. I think we're sort of in like whatchamacallit. It's like when when the last king dies and the next king is just a baby, and there's sort of like a regent, but we're in regency right now. I think that's what I think about. And so in this period of regency, there's a lot of sort of like, oh my God, what's going to happen, right? because the region's not really ruling. The region's just kind of keeping things like stable. And then everybody's waiting for the next king and what the next king is going to be about. And obviously, I think we're kind of already seeing some of the shape of what's coming up. Last week, they dropped a pretty big draft on sort of the upcoming market legislation bill. It's not all perfect, but it's you can sort of already start to see some of the shape of what sufficient decentralization and the role of governance looks like. A lot of it is going to be a control test. There's going to be a lot more disclosure requirements and a lot more transparency involved. But who's to say? We can already start guessing at the shape, and I'm happy to start, playing a little bit of the guessing game. I'm sure you have your own guesses too. But yeah, that's kind of where I think we're headed. It's like in this J curve of like, in order to get to a better place, we had to dip into this weird place of like in between zone.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think we are sort of in that middle. And I think the challenge though is that it creates a lot of confusion for projects. Like any of the projects I'm talking to through the work I do at Autonomous, where we're helping projects launch, is they're undecided. Like, do we go full US? Do we go offshore? Do we do a combination, or do we just wait until there's regulatory certainty? And I think what's especially confusing is that even if the SEC has a plan in place, or there is regulation that allows for how projects can launch, there's still a lot of uncertainty around things like tax code and the IRS. Seen everything from whether C3s will kind of be a structure in which you could use to launch a token. That's typically what you would use for US Foundation, but if that legislation changes, you wouldn't necessarily have that tax status, even if you are doing things like governance and grants and things that are not for profit activities. So it's creating a lot of confusion, and I'm curious how that impacts the work you're doing in your business, because obviously until we know, it could be next year before we actually get anything cemented. It's a guessing game of where you're gonna set up and how you're gonna operate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you guys are experiencing a lot of the same things as us. And I think this sort of like is confusing for projects too. Everybody is sort of into like, I mean, if you're really nerdy like the two of us, you're like trying to read the like latest PDFs from the .gov websites. But normal people are not reading this stuff, and so I think it's sort of like, I think we're at this. I'm curious what your experience has been like. Like, I feel like everybody has sort of like a guess on the general direction, but it's pretty vague on the details still. It seems like generally onshore entities are now more possible, but can one be fully onshore? It's not super clear. It seems that decentralization is important, but how important and how soon, we don't know. It seems that we're heading towards sort of this dual regulatory agency thing, but like how certain is that? We don't know. So you can start seeing some of the shape of what's coming, and I think projects can start sort of like skating towards where the puck is going. Forgive my Canadianisms, but it's like you can't skate too close to where the puck is going, I think, because it's sort of this art of like, skating close enough to where the puck is going, but not so far that you're kind of subject to the thrash of like the latest stuff.
Yeah, I mean, my experience just with stacks, we did the Reg A. This was years ago when this could be a path in which to do a regulated token offering in the US. And we spent millions of dollars and worked with the most cutting edge lawyers in order to get this done. But it ended up being not a path. I think there's maybe a handful of other projects that took that path. We were like, oh, this will be the way. And it didn't end up being the way. So we went through a lot of work, a lot of hurdles, a lot of costs in order to kind of pave a path. But most people just took the offshore path instead. So I think anyone who's trying to like be the leader in setting new models in the US is kind of at that same risk of maybe they're going to spend a lot of time and energy and cost, and the ROI on it may not be clear. I also think it comes down to the law firms that are willing to take on that sort of first mover choice if they want you to stay in the US, because it can put a big spotlight on their practice. It could create challenges to the lead lawyers who are doing it. We saw this even just with token sales back in 2017. The lead lawyers, there was some skepticism of whether they created the right vehicle in which to do that or not. So I do think that there is some risk there. And so you may hear different things from different law firms of like, great, go launch in the US. This is a great idea, versus like, well, in our best advice, it would be
yeah. And honestly, I don't think that anybody is particularly right or wrong about this, because it's impossible to be fully right or wrong about this. So it's almost like, I think it depends on sort of like the legal, where people think the regulatory is going, folks' legal strategies, and frankly, sometimes like bag bias, where some firms have products that they love selling that are pretty well packaged. So it's a little bit of a combination of all of the above. It seems that certainly we're in a place where with sufficiently high motivation, you are able to likely wrangle the entity structure and the jurisdiction choice that you would want, but it's just going to be expensive. And you might be right if you're too opinionated, sort of this. And you're not going to be wrong in a catastrophic way. You might just be wrong in that was probably not the easiest way of doing things. It's sort of like you said with stacks, where it's like, oh man, like if it is reggae thing, maybe everybody would be doing reggae. And then it's like, psych, actually everybody just went to the Caymans. And so I think I'm sure you're seeing this too. And this is kind of where I feel like a lot of projects are like in this holding pattern where they're just trying to punt on this as much as possible. And I think punting for now means that they're still going to go the path of offshore entities, because that's just sort of almost the default things that people are doing. And if you try to do stuff onshore, it generally is more effortful. And so I don't know how long the status quo will maintain, but that's certainly what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think the other piece just always is the tax implication. It's like the IRS is a separate sort of organization, and how they decide to tax these token events, holding tokens, doing grants out of your corp or foundation. If you can get that status, that's like a big, I think, challenge, that if you're putting a 30% cost on top of your token launch, it might be far more attractive to spend the additional cost to go offshore.
Yeah. I mean, so that's kind of what I've heard from most projects choosing offshore, is that sometimes they will have a US wrapper for the entity, like a Duna in Wyoming, although that's kind of still very new, but like they will do the issuance out of the Caymans for tax reasons. Although recently the Zora team did their whole issuance out of the Delaware C Corp, and they had some pretty novel legal and tax opinions from Deloitte and Paul Hastings about sort of the cost basis of a token at issuance, which is zero. And so that therefore there was no tax implication for them, and that they also didn't have to issue tokens to anybody who claimed the airdrop, as long as they maintained the airdrop claimable forever. And so, but as a consequence of that, they had to be very clear in that this was a valueless token, right? So like, and that caused a lot of controversy for that team, where they were like explicitly, this is a for fun token and has no utility whatsoever in their marketing. So right, teams are doing some pretty interesting novel things out there. I don't know how many teams can follow Zora's path, because it's sort of this pretty opinionated, spicy path. But like, this is sort of maybe the first time I've seen somebody try, at least somebody of sort of sufficient scale, try to do the whole thing out of a C Corp.
Yeah, which I think has, it's groundbreaking, but also, are there downstream effects? We've seen.
Right, and they're not going to know. Right, it's like they're not going to know until it's tested in court, right? Yes. And then so like it's a risk, it's a business strategy, right? It's like it depends on if this is the path you want to go down.
Well, I even see just large exchanges not wanting to do business with U.S. organizations, because why should they take the risk? They have nothing onshore in the U.S. Why would they do business if they could just work with offshore entities? So I wonder if there'll be any challenges that they run into where they're like, great, we want to list or we want to have wallet support for certain vendors, and they're like, well, we only sign with offshore companies. So how do you do that? How do you move the tokens? What are your tax implications there? But I'm glad people are pushing the boundary and paving the path.
I think what the whole space is looking for is almost a extremely successful precedent-setting token launch. Right. In the same way that like the space rallied around sort of the points meta like overnight because of like Blur and Blast. Not that they're doing particularly well these days, but it was clearly a successful launch strategy. Like, I think our space is like so small and everybody is so connected to everyone that once a like sufficiently reasonable, like a successful model is established, that like we will instantly consolidate around that. It's the same way that people consolidated around sort of like Compound Governor, even though it wasn't that great, but like it like, seemed good at the time. And all of a sudden everybody is just copying Compound Governance. And so like for better and worse, that's kind of how the industry like behaves most of the time.
Yeah. How do you view with the current governance space, like who's doing it well, or what's sort of the new model that you see your community being attracted to, or what has sort of changed over time in that, on-chain voting, people want a certain number of votes. Do they vote all the time? Do they vote on everything? Like what's sort of maybe the more tactical, if a project was like, we want to have a good handle on our governance, what are the trends you're seeing there?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in there. So let me break that apart. So like, what are we seeing that we're excited about, and what are some projects that are doing it well? Generally, I think the thing that we're seeing is sort of like a level of realism about governance. I think there's sort of like, I think in the before world, we were in the either like, I'm not going to do anything at all and I'm going to just fly by the seat of my pants, or I'm going to do this really serious thing that's sort of like super buttoned up. And I think we're sort of seeing that like neither side is working particularly well. And so I think what we're starting to see more is folks having a more nuanced approach of like, okay, like what actually needs to be decentralized from day one? What can we start with sort of like keeping close to our chest? And let's sort of like think like area by area, like, okay, do we want protocol upgrades to be held close to our chest? Do we want capital allocation to be via the community? Do we want the community maybe to just have a veto and then we are actually optimistically doing things? So like, I think folks are much more nuanced about where they want to decentralize first. And I think frankly, the whole space is leading towards decentralizing a little less, which honestly, as like ethos wise, is quite bad for the space, right? And regulatorily, eventually it's going to have to swing the other side. But that's kind of what we're seeing. And so that's kind of what Agora is skating towards too, right? We have these like fine grained controls for teams where they can come in and decide like for these kind of proposals, is this kind of difficulty? For that kind of proposal, it's actually optimistic, but then the community can veto if they're really unhappy. And so just really providing the tooling for folks to like sort of area by area think through how they want things to behave, and then sort of like a fit for purpose governance system. And so the examples that I maybe like to give of fit for purpose systems at two extremes, one is Optimism, the other one is Aerodrome. So Optimism has this sort of like big, it's sort of this like, I think in America, we would call this big tent politics, right? In some sense, Optimism is the biggest tent, right? Because it's sort of not only every app on the OP mainnet that's sort of like, like in the tent, it's also every chain operator on the super chain and every app on every chain operator. So it is the biggest of tents. And so they're managing a complex constituency. They're taking things slowly, decentralizing like over time. We've been working with them for 2 years now. And they've just like every 6 months adding more decentralization as the community is ready. They have very granular settings on what is sort of decided by the team, what is decided by the community. And they delegate a lot of the decisions to committees of experts that are accountable to the token holders, just like well-managed complex system. People catch, they still catch flack, for a variety of different things, but given the magnitude of the challenge, I think they're doing incredibly well. And then on the other side, I think when it comes to fit for purpose, I really love the Aerodrome model. And like, this is to be clear, and not available for everyone, but Aerodrome was like, all right, we're a DEX. What is the primary governance action needed from DEX? It's one, we need a token that accrues value because we need this token to maintain this value so that we can use it for incentives and yada yada. And two, we need to that allocate incentive across different pools to attract the most valuable assets on our platform and attract LPs. And so they have this really they have this very sophisticated but one track system called a VE token model that does one thing, right? It's like every epoch, folks come in and they vote on where to put the pools. So where to put that, which pools to put the incentives to. And so it sort of aligns incentives between LPs, token holders, and traders, and it keeps the system very simple, and everybody is incentivized to vote well. So it's sort of this highly specific system that they are like, we don't need to govern anything else. That's it. This is our one thing. And that I think also works incredibly well for them. And so if you really think about it, like Aerodrome has been coming from behind. They had no right to exist given the Uniswap's dominance, but they've carved out a niche for themselves because they've had this, in some sense, like more aligned governance model. Now, we work closely with the Uniswap team, and the Uniswap team is not unaware of this. So they're really like doing a lot behind the scenes to sort of like improve governance too. But being sort of, and a public enemy number one for the SEC, they have a little bit more constraint and are moving a little slower.
Yeah, and it's harder to change the system once it's like fully launched and baked and you have a lot of opinionated holders and users in it. So absolutely, I see that. So do you think like in the future, this is maybe a wish of, will there be more consolidation of or shared resourcing around governance? Because it does seem like every project, no matter if it's big or small, is duplicating the same sort of efforts and needs to get community involvement and voting. And it could be useful to have some more, collectives around even operating some of that governance, even if it's community specific, like voting or decision making. Or do you think that it'll remain that if you launch a project, you have very bespoke governance, you have your own full setup, you use tools like Agora, obviously, but what do you think will happen, given that there's, thousands of
Yeah.
chains. There's even tokens like Pump.Fun sort of printing new ones every day.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think my overall view on this is that it's going to go one of two ways. Like the really bad way it goes is that like we just never get any regulation, and sort of we just get sort of like also a frankly asleep at the wheel SEC. And so just like it's like crime season forever, right? Well, until the next administration, and it sort of breeds a class of projects that are kind of like slow motion rugs. So that's world number one. Like not a great world, but I don't think it's impossible that we head towards that world, right? This is sort of like you work in crypto long enough and you have to look into the abyss a little bit. It's like it is very possible that this whole space is a slow motion rug. So that's world number one. World number two is the world that we want to live in, which is the world where there's sort of this like, like it's just like CRMs in the early day. Every company build their own CRM because they're like, wow, we're like it's going to be such a big competitive advantage for us to build our own CRM. We're going to get so much better at sales. And you're like, actually, no, it's our competitive advantage to just build our product better. We're going to just buy a CRM. And then turns out there are people who just do CRM for a living, and it's just going to be fine. And so I think that's the world that I want to live in, that we're trying to push for. It's sort of this world where like, look, like not only do we from an ethos perspective want decentralized governance, but also from a regulatory perspective, there is a reason for us to have the right controls and transparency, because crypto as an asset class should behave with the same like protections as every other asset class for investors. And then people just like click a couple of buttons and sort of make some important strategic choices and get the system that makes sense for their community. And so I do think that we're going to see fewer people building bespoke systems. It's already happening, in fact, frankly. And so I think that's sort of the long-term trend. Unless we go like roll down the hill into the deep pit of darkness that is just slow motion rugs.
Yeah. I also hope for the latter, not the slow motion rugs. I'm sure there are some people who will find a way to slow motion rug, as they always do in crypto, a few breakaways. But let's focus on the positive. So what would you like to see, given your background in design and Web3, that would make things even easier going forward for projects launching? Obviously, regulatory clarity is something that we're wishing for, but nothing we can kind of do. But are there other tools or ways that you imagine that could be simpler going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I think decentralization and governance is a huge boogeyman for teams, right? They're sort of like, it's sort of, people have this very strange relationship towards it because we're all in this space because we care about decentralization and so decentralized systems. Yet when you sort of bring it up specifically to any team, they're like, no, maybe later. It's so scary. I don't want to lose, I don't want to be like lose control. It's going to be really annoying. But normal companies, when they grow up, also like change, right? It's like as you grow up, like any organization that grows up changes. And so the normal world has developed all these social frameworks, these best practices, all these tooling around like operating a organization at scale. Of course, being a 3 people in a garage is very different than if being 300 people. But most companies end up wanting to be 300 people because usually that's when you grow up and that's what you want to do. And yet in crypto, we're like, oh no, please, we don't want to have more people in the system. And I think that's partly because of weird regulation, making people think that when you grow up, you just die from vitocracy. And it just doesn't have to be that way, right? It's like, yes, of course, things are going to be a little slower, but they're not going to be slow for really stupid reasons. They're going to be slow because you're moving more people and with larger stakes. Of course, it's going to be a little slower, but it's going to be slow in a way that is commensurate with sort of the responsibility and the impact that you have. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping is sort of that we sort of can build the apps and experiences and sort of the systems that make people, nobody's ever going to be excited about being a little bit more decentralized, a little bit slower, but that makes people feel like, damn, it's for the right reasons. I'm excited about the outcome of this, which is sort of us having more impact, having a larger organization, a larger community, and that we can get there in a very reasonable, not crazy, not dramatic way.
It does feel like if there's more blueprints of okay, what does governance look like at this phase of your company, and then as you grow, what does it look like at the next phase and the third phase? And we've seen a lot of documentation around Web2 companies when they kind of go through these growth spurts and what's required, whereas I think in Web3 it's still no, we're all
let's just pretend that right? Yeah. And it's
here's a playbook.
Yeah, I think not only is there that, but there's also this sort of desire to just to Peter Pan this whole thing, right? Maybe we just never have to grow up.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like, no, right? Like if you want to be around for 10 years, you just have to learn to get good at these things. And you can get good at these things.
Yeah. Much in the way of your Coinbase story of things moving slowly, it's like that's one of their advantages is that they've actually always been very like, let's do it the way that's going to be the most long lasting. And
yeah, and you know what? Coinbase did major mess up during a couple of years where they went through a couple of dark ages of like, oh no, like we grew up and slowed down like crazy. It like made all the mistakes, but then they like fixed it. Right, like it's like everybody I talk to there now is like, oh my god, like we're moving fast again. We fixed all the things. Please come back. Like trust me, it's not the same anymore. You can just simply be good at operating at scale. It takes a little bit of learning, but it's like it's available for you if you really want to go for that. And I think most teams should go for that because that's what long-term success means.
yeah. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, like how do you view the impact of AI on some of this work? So both in governance, there's different protocols that help you spin up sort of your governance or your DAO very easily, or even having agents that do some of the work behind the scenes in your organization. Do you think that's in the near term? Is that long term, or how do you think about the impact that might have over the next year?
I have a very spicy answer to this, which is that like I don't think it's going to have any impact at all.
Okay,
and I'm going to sound like a Luddite.
Yeah,
and
no, bring it on. Why?
Yeah. So, okay, first of all, my disclosure is that I live in San Francisco. Everybody and their grandma is really excited about AI. And so am I, by the way. And I live and breathe this stuff. But like what governance fundamentally, like if you think about like the set of problems that governance is facing, these are problems of control, of access, of decision making. And I think this is almost like on the Maslow's pyramid of like AI automatable things, like probably among the last. Now, like I think there's sort of a lot of governance activities that look like on their face things that AI could help with, right? Like reading proposals, like casting your vote. Maybe you have an agent to do this, like keeping up with stuff. And there's like some marginal workflows that I think like AI will help with. But like fundamentally, governance isn't about making proposals. It's not about reading things. It's not about like talking to people and like trying to figure out what they're going to vote. All of these are sort of like input activities into governance that like I'm sure like some people will make, and so will we, like make like AI assisted features that's going to make this workflow 25% better. But really what makes governance 5x better and 10x better is the correct incentive alignment. It's the sort of a correct like incentive design. It's sort of the correct control structures. And these things are extremely, the problem, the shape of the problem is really simple. It's like, all right, who is allowed to vote? Which way does the incentive flow? It's actually really simple. You don't need AI for this, but you need to face some hard decisions that are sort of more like at a incentive level that I think is sort of like doesn't really benefit from AI that much. And then of course it's like, filing like compliance disclosures. Yeah, you bet we're going to try our hardest to make that stuff AI generated. But that's like, again, that is not the heart of governance. That is the mere artifact of governance, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've seen in the past there's been all sorts of attacks on governance, or that's like a vector in which people are trying to, take over control. How do you view, I mean, with AI, I think it creates risk vectors too of people, having manipulative bots like representing some decision that isn't really there. Have you seen any of that sort of play out, or is that still, punted down the road?
Not yet, but I suspect that like it won't be long before we get sort of these like deep fake, right? Sort of like it's sort of some of the same social engineering attacks that you would see on normal organizations being conducted against sort of on-chain organizations. So very much so, but I would categorize this category of problem into the same category of problem as normal security, where like you're gonna have to get a lot better at sort of like preventing social engineering. I'm sure there's a lot to do, but I don't think of these as like fundamentally specific to the practice of on-chain governance. Again, I sound like a Luddite. I fully recognize that because like how could you not be excited about AI? And I am. It's like it's sort of like AI helpful for the artifacts of governance, and then like the core of governance is fundamentally about humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, no, I think that's good. I mean, in some ways, it's helpful to think, great, it won't all be replaced, because if it is, it might be very hard to get incentives structured the right way if it's an agent who actually has, can exist without the human incentive.
Yeah, like theory of like, the last remaining human tasks are either alignment and decision making, which at the high level, of course, there's like a lot of low level stuff that can be AI automated, but like at the high level, I think those are the last things. Like, what do we want, and how? Like that's that's inherently human. What do we want the outcomes to be? And then the other on the very other side is like beauty and craft, right? And I think this sort of this like AI art is getting very good, but it's like it hits different when you know there was a human with intention behind this versus like an AI. And we use AI art all the time, so I'm not also against it, but it's sort of like those are probably the barbell of activities that we think are going to be the last remaining.
Okay, before we wrap up, just wanted to hear, your role looking at the beauty of things. What's sort of the design space that you can't stop thinking about, either in Agora or in crypto, from a design perspective?
Oh, it's a great question. The thing that I'm most excited about is non-reflexive use cases of crypto. So it's sort of like crypto for people who don't care about crypto. Yeah, I know this is a very tired drumbeat and that has been beating for a long time, but like it has never felt so needed for me. Crypto is a $3 trillion asset class, but like if you think about it, it's like, like subtract Bitcoin, subtract all the high FDV, low float tokens, and it really feels like the whole crypto industry is 200 companies, 10,000 traders, and like 1,000 devs. It's just very, very, very small. And if all you're doing as a company and as an industry is catering to the people who are already here, it's kind of all very pointless, right? So it's sort of this like we're doing amazing work scaling Ethereum. Like a lot of really amazing people are coming together doing deep fundamental research on cryptography to advance this forward. But there's another group of people down the street from me who are doing the same difficulty of work, summoning machine god and sort of, fundamentally like the amount of intelligence in the world. And so if you think about like, if all we do at the end of the day, all this hard work, sweat, blood, and tears that goes into making crypto a thing is that we cater to like 200 companies, 10,000 traders, and 1,000 devs. It's kind of a little pointless. And so I think the design space that I think a lot about is sort of like, what is a real world use case that somebody would just benefit from being on crypto infrastructure without ever caring or knowing that they're on crypto infrastructure. And of course, like this is kind of where like the stablecoin stuff comes in, where everybody's like, yay, stablecoins, still very early, like we're seeing like quick takeoff, but it's still very early. I'm excited about that. And I think a lot about like, what else with the next stablecoin? What else can benefit the same ways as stablecoins have benefited from being on chain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I can't wait to hear what you come up with, because I think that's like the holy grail is like things that onboard new users and give a lot of value to the infrastructure that isn't just token.
Totally. More soon.
So yeah,
more soon from us, more soon from many other people, I hope.
Yes. Okay, so where can people find more about Agora and more about you online?
Yeah. So hit us up at agora.xyz, and then we're at Agora Governance on Twitter. I myself am at ZHA Yitong. So we're probably in your DMs, like a bunch too. So hit us back if we're in your DMs already.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate all the conversation.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
All right.